You're like a pro at stuff now, man.
Yeah, because I do have another podcast going on different topics called the Pulling the Threads podcast. So I interview doctors and professors and stuff in
Hmm.
ancient history, textual criticism. So yeah, I've had a podcast like not even related to martial arts going on for a while.
Yeah, somebody on Facebook was mentioned something about that, and I thought to myself, all the incessant, what I call backing and forthing, right,
Uh,
between that we sometimes get involved in. I think some people seem to believe that all JKD people are interested in and all they know about
it's JKD,
is JKD. And that is the dumbest thing. That
right?
is the dumbest premise. The other dumb premise that I think people who indulge in this are trying to appear superior is the
Yeah,
whole shut up and train.
yeah,
Like, if you and I spend a few minutes on Facebook, do they think that that's the entire day?
right?
Right? Don't they realize that we're going to be out there training and teaching
Yeah.
more time than we're spending on Facebook? So I don't get this thing about, oh, you guys spend so much time on Facebook when you should be this. I think it's dumb. It
I mean,
really dumb.
it's a way of minimizing what people are saying. It's trying to reduce things down, and basically discredit what somebody's saying. Oh, you should be
Mhm.
training. Okay, well, why aren't you training? You're making comments on here too. So I mean, yeah, go train. Why don't you? So
Exactly.
yeah,
Right. Hey, I just realized that we almost look like twins with
oh
our
yeah,
logos, man. Check that out.
the
Right.
black and white day.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I always used to say that at the Inasano Academy, when you had the instructor conferences, you should
hmm
let everybody wear their uniform shirt,
hmm
right? Because then you could have a discussion amongst the different people about, well, how come you're using this, and what was the idea behind that design and what
yeah,
have you, you
yeah.
know? All right. So for those of you who are logging in to our warm-up conversation, this is the Jeet Kune Dialogues episode number 301 with Jeremiah Giehl, who is making his second appearance, I think, on the program. And up until a few months ago, we had never actually met in person. But then when Ron Reagan and I and Glenn and Bill from my Miami group were out in LA, we went to dinner with you and Glenn and Christine,
Yeah,
right? Yeah,
down in Chinatown, not far from the Bruce Lee statue.
right. Yeah. So actually, after you left, and then we were walking back to the cars, that we had that brilliant idea, and so we walked over there
Mm,
and took some shots and what have you. Yeah, I had never done that
yeah.
touristy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry I had to cut short because I was running out on a hot date. So I got to see y'all for a bit, and then I was like, I got things
Hey
I gotta
man,
do.
even a JKD man's got to have his priorities. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
So yeah.
So yeah. So I did put in the preview postcard that we were going to have a conversation about mental health and what have you. And I am no expert. I
Mhm.
think you're way more versed in this topic than I am. But I did want to ask you about this because it is my observation that in the past few years in the media, it seems that they use that phrase mental health a lot more than I seem to remember them doing that. Is that an accurate perception?
You're saying that they focus about mental health awareness more, I guess,
Yeah,
in the
I, I
media.
hear I hear people. So, for example, back in one thing I remembered was in the Olympics when the little girl, I forget her name now, but the little girl, I think she withdrew from the competition or something
Yeah. Mhm.
over a case of the twisties or whatever that was. And so
Yeah.
then there was this whole thing in the follow up. All the media reports were about the importance of mental health and this, and you hear it like over and over again when they're the unfortunate, the mass shootings and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Everybody talks about it. So, I mean, is this, obviously it's not something new,
Yeah.
but what is there? I mean, has there been a movement to make the population at large more aware of these things?
So I think it's really an effort to destigmatize mental health issues,
Hmm.
um, because if you look at the older generations, people born 70 and before, I would say, you grew up in an environment that we grew up in an environment that was a lot tougher than kids these days. Kids nowadays, they're in anti-bullying spaces. Like we had to deal with physical violence versus nowadays you can barely say something to somebody in person or online without it becoming bullying. So
Right.
there's been a change in mental health awareness, but also because of, and I don't know, I think the stuff we went through made us more resilient, made us more stronger. It didn't
Hmm.
necessarily make us weaker. So this oversensitivity, I feel, has actually weakened people. But in a culture where people are conditioned in school and everything in a much softer environment, um, the people who have trauma and things are more exposed, and dealing with stigmas prevents people from getting access to care. And, the stigmas make them afraid to tell people or talk about it and stuff. So I believe that in general, there's been, I don't know, I'd say it was decentralized. I don't think it was a central movement, but for people to advocate for talking about mental health issues, removing the stigma about mental health issues, um, so that people wouldn't be afraid to talk about it or access care.
Right.
And with social media, you have access to more communication, more words in front of your face on a regular basis. In the past, you had to talk to a person and engage in conversation. And historically, guys talk less, women talk more. On a daily basis, we didn't encounter as many words as we do now. uh, Now on social media, you're reading, you're reading a couple newspapers a day. So it's access of information, and then those advocating for healthy, safe spaces. And there is a amount of that awareness in safe spaces we need. But I also think adversity breeds strength. Humans are very resilient people, and being overly sensitive does in ways prevent people from the resiliency that comes through things. I mean, to talk about just a simple thing, medication and stuff. Um, Letting your kid play in the dirt, get exposed to dirt, and his immune system fighting the things from being exposed to dirt is good for his immune system. You
Right.
keep him in a safe environment and he's not exposed to that. Well, now you've got to start doing a bunch of vaccines because his body isn't fighting the things it needs to. So adversity isn't a necessarily bad thing in itself. I mean, trauma, very, like things that lead to post-traumatic stress disorder and stuff. That stuff is definitely stuff that we need to mitigate, manage, and deal with. But
Mhm.
adversity isn't a bad thing, that, and in my, I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I probably have expertise from the amount of years that I have sought to proactively manage my mental health, being diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, panic attacks from trauma and stuff that violent trauma that I experienced. It wasn't the sexy trauma. It wasn't like you said, you tell somebody you have PTSD, oh, you were a soldier, you fought in the war. I'm like, no, I didn't. Sorry. It's not the cool PTSD. And apparently, like, oh, you got it in the war, you're a soldier. I'm like,
Yeah.
no. And they're just kind of disappointed. And I'm like, well, unfortunately, it was, violence from my father, like gang violence I experienced growing up that caused me to have PTSD. It wasn't the cool PTSD.
Right.
Apparently, if you're a soldier, you're the cool kids with PTSD. Even though I
Yep.
think if you have PTSD, you don't feel like it's cool at all. But you know, um, I think it's a good thing that people are aware of mental health and communicated about it. And, that's kind of why I suggested the idea of this is just to make awareness about it, make sure that our spaces are safe.
Mhm.
I think martial arts in general is aspirational. So it is good for people I mean, I constantly encounter people who are like, I was traumatized, I was mugged, I had this happen. and they're coming to regain confidence in their life.
Right.
Right. So martial arts is very aspirational. Movies like The Karate Kid, where, he's getting bullied, he trains under, his instructor, and then he learns how to have confidence and stand up for himself. Um, Actually, this is the beauty of martial arts, is that through physical activity, and one of the things, the myths I'd like to dispel that I regularly run into to people who don't practice martial arts, is people who do martial arts tend to be a lot calmer people than people who do not. I have people who are like, "Oh, you do martial arts? Oh, so you're violent?" I'm like, "No, actually, I felt like when I was growing up, being grown up in the hood and gang violence, you feel like you have to respond to violence with violence. But when I started learning martial arts, I had confidence and I realized I no longer had to.
Yeah.
So violence became less of an option and something I sought to avoid, because now I know how to handle myself. I don't need to beat you up because you're talking smack to me. I can actually de-escalate, use, my verbal de-escalation skills. I can try to talk you out. Because what's the point of fighting anyways? I don't want to be in altercation, and hopefully the other person doesn't, but sometimes you run into people that do. So I
Yeah.
think, martial arts is very it's a good tool that a lot of people come to because they want confidence in their life, whether it be trauma, bullying. Some people just do it for the sports aspects of it. But yeah, I don't know if I got too off on a tangent there.
No, I'm wondering though, like you say, so a lot of people will come to martial art because they want to improve confidence and what have you.
Mhm.
What is the magic then behind that? That now they start learning kicking and punching, and all of a sudden they feel better. See, to me, in my uneducated um, status about the situation, it seems to me that
Mm.
it was all in their mind, and now their minds are focused elsewhere, or the activity, the physical activity, has refocused their minds. So I'm not trying to diminish anything, but is it possible that in some instances it was really just in their mind and they just need to rewire the way they thought about themselves?
Um, how do I say this? I mean, there's a both and, like, yes and no.
Mhm.
Um, well, one, physical activity releases endorphins. So, if you're dealing with a stress episode, like you have anxiety or panic attacks, going for a walk, going for a run, doing exercise, it releases endorphins in your body. Um, it stimulates the neurotransmitters in your brain. So, the endorphins are the feel good emotions. So doing martial arts can help you in emotional regulation by releasing, because it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. You have trauma that triggers changes in the way we process things in our brain, and it leads to uh, microgenetic changes. It doesn't lead to it's not going to change your genes. It's on a micro level that it impacts your genetics. On epigenetics is what they talk about. Epigenetics. Epigenetics is how life experiences changes the way we process things chemically in our body. They've done studies of twins. You have two twins who, identical twins. They grew up together. They can finish each other's sentences. They're very similar in a lot of things, but they've studied their genome, and over their life, the epigenetics of two twins starts to diverge to where it's almost like two strangers epigenetics in their genetics. So life experience can impact the way that our bodies release and process chemicals. And so that's why, like, sometimes when somebody's emotional regulation is really bad, they provide a medication to balance out the imbalance in their neurotransmitters and the chemicals, because they're shock produces too much dopamine. Dopamine is where we get the idea of dope, like drugs, crack. So when you're having a severe panic attack, the fight or flight syndrome, um, and you also release cortisol into your body. Cortisol congeals in your belly. Is that really hard fat that's hard to get rid of? Not the beer, not to be confused with like a beer belly or somebody eating a lot of sugar, but the stress belly. It's the really hard fat. So your body in stress produces chemicals because your brain's telling your body, the subconsciously fight or flight, whatever your response to trauma is. So um, some of it is, and I do believe in the cognitive emotive theory that thoughts lead to emotions, lead to action. And if you change the way you think, you change the way you feel, it changes the way you act. So, yes,
Mhm.
on one level, martial arts can help somebody release endorphins that make them feel good. On another level, it can rewire their lack of confidence by exposure therapy. So, like if you remember the movie Red Belt, I don't know if you saw that one. A lady experiences trauma. She comes to start training, and she's exposed to the act that was done to her, and then over a time learns confidence to how overcome that. So martial arts can provide exposure therapy where you're exposed to the very violence you experienced and learn how to overcome it, and in a
Right.
way have emotional release, which is something that I work with people sometimes when they come for trauma. Is we'll give them skills, but then I'll also take them through like what, when they come specifically, like I had this assault, what would you do in this situation? How do I handle this in the future? I give them skills, and then we work through that situation. And when they're comfortable, you put them in the situation and teach them how to fight out. So next time, if they're in that situation, but what it does is it gives a bit of emotional release and confidence where, like, okay, one, I can avoid it. And two, if it happens again, this is what I would do. And I feel like it is a bit of retraining the mind because you're giving them the confidence to say, okay, I've experienced this trauma, but the beautiful thing about it is they're learning to overcome it. They're tackling it head on. They're not, running from it. And this is why I say adversity isn't a bad thing. We're not going to avoid adversity, but as humans, we're very resilient. I mean, I think from, you know, however you believe we came to be, whether evolution or creation, there is still microevolution, changes that have happened over, because of the survival of the fittest. Um, we've adapted to a lot of things through the environment around us, and humans are very we're it's a beautiful thing that we adapt to things. So um, I think the beauty of martial arts is the ability to help people adapt and find that strength, that resilience, to fight through the trauma. Like I like helping people work through it and get to the point where it no longer controls them, they control themselves. Because the problem of trauma is when it controls a person, then because they're afraid to do things, because exposure to things triggers panic attacks and stuff like that. And so a lot of my experience is I feel like I've become successful in overcoming and conquering PTSD and panic attacks through strategies I've learned over a long period of time, years of counseling, support groups. I've had to be on medication, but getting to a point through mindfulness, good mental health practices, physical activity, and diet. Food is medicine. Diet, being able to get to a point where I don't have any signs of symptoms of PTSD. I don't have severe panic attacks, and I did it doing mindfulness, breath control, diet, exercise, and intentionally socializing. After one of the worst periods in my life, my ex committed parent-child abduction. She intentionally did things that led to the car get impounded, took my check for like 2.5 months, and I was facing eviction, and I had to pick myself up from scratch and work through all this stuff. During that time is when I worked with my counselor to come off the medication for depression and anxiety. And I learned that physical activity, going for walks and things like that, release endorphins, mindfulness and a lot of things. And I took my life back to a way that I feel great. It feels good uh, to be in charge and not need those kind of things. So I feel like I like to try to pass on things, to other people. And that's kind of why I want to bring awareness to it, is it's something people struggle with, but martial arts is one avenue that we can aid people on a journey of recovery.
Mhm.
Um, so
Um, so tell me about the commonalities, and then if there are specific differences, because you work with all ages, right?
Not currently. I have run after school programs, and I
Mhm.
used to teach kids martial arts. Currently, I teach a primarily adult program.
Okay.
So I'm not currently. I have, yeah, but I also teach adaptive martial arts, which I find rewarding. Um, it's sad
What
because
okay, so two things then. Break down adaptive martial arts for me, and then if you can recall, were there commonalities or specific differences when you were working with kids and in the way that you work with adults?
um, I'll start with the second one. There are commonalities between kids and adults, but differences. Um, because with kids, well, one, I did a lot of traditional martial arts when I taught kids.
Uh-huh.
Because one of the kid, well, so the structure of traditional martial arts is really good for kids with ADHD and emotional regulation issues because the structure and the discipline is really good for focusing them for 30 minutes to an hour, and that kind of discipline I've seen successfully help turn kids who were angry or had out of control like ADHD. That physical activities have brought them down and balanced them. And as long as they practiced that, they actually did better managing their ADHD and emotional deregulation. So, because and I've taught PE, which I was technically teaching Taekwondo and Krav Maga for as the PE coach. Um, and I've done after school programs and kids martial arts. And so um really there's a lot of parents that they'd be like, my kid has ADHD, he has emotional deregulation, and I think the discipline would be good for him. And I saw a lot of success with that. So now there's similarities, but it's different with adults, especially the ones who come because they've been mugged. Um, which also kind of takes me into the adaptive martial arts. One of the guys I teach that's in a wheelchair, and I find this so unfortunate. He was assaulted in his wheelchair by a couple of his friends, pull him out of his wheelchair and beat him up. Um, one, like, what is wrong with people that they are assaulting somebody in a wheelchair? I mean, like, boggles the mind. But another like other adults who come to me because of I was talking to somebody today who is going to start training with me because she experienced an assault, and there's other people I've been training with. Um, in general, it's a little different with people who've experienced assault. One, they want to learn skills, very practical skills that will end a fight and avoid a fight immediately. And so the way I approach adults with trauma is definitely different than kids. Um, I find them both fulfilling. I haven't done like teaching kids martial arts since my kids went to Texas. My son was an assistant instructor. He was a big part of that. So I didn't feel like continuing to do kids martial arts. I've focused on adults as, uh, just it's easier not to run a daycare. But there is money. There is money in running a daycare.
Right.
The parents, and I found this to be true. Parents will throw a lot of money at their kids, especially if they have ADHD, emotional deregulation, and they want their kid to have some. They'll sign up for a 2 to 3 year program to get them to their black belt or their master's program.
Yeah.
And they'll do it, and they will make their kid come. So you have money and students if you want to do it. But when you have kids like that,